Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Battle for Azeroth video. Over the past few days, we've talked a lot about the new features of the expansion, and as cool as they are, well, seeing the world that we're going to be occupying for likely 2 years once this comes out is just as important. And we've actually got quite a good idea of what the two new continents of Kul'tiras and Zandalar are going to be like, and what we can expect from the general layout of this expansion. So, while technically we are still helping Magni and Azeroth, the faction conflict is very much at the core of this expansion, at least initially. The expansion starts off right after the cinematic ends with the Battle of Lordaeron. This is the opening gambit for the expansion, much like, say, the Broken Shore was for Legion. And while we don't know 100% who wins this battle, we do know that the Undercity is left as, well, even more of a ruin, essentially being indefensible. We then find out that Teldrassil has been burnt down, but Blizzard did not tell us which order these events happened in. So, the burning of Teldrassil could have been preemptive, or perhaps was it a response after what happened at the Undercity? We'll just have to see. What we do know is that this faction conflict will actually be represented in the world, so high-level players will be essentially in a different phase for that content. This means that you can still level up through Teldrassil, but the events of the Battle for Azeroth story will be reflected once you hit the higher levels. Now, after the initial setup narrative of the expansion, both the Alliance and the Horde have mostly consolidated power on their respective continents. Then, in a scramble for new allies and resources, Alliance players find themselves traveling to the old human state of Kul'tiras, and then the Horde strikes up an alliance with the Zandalari trolls, and of course gains a valuable foothold on the island of Zandalar. And this takes us on to the content. Horde players will level from 110 to 120 on the 3 zones of Zandalar, and Alliance players will do so on Kul'tiras. While leveling, you will also be playing through the War campaign. This is a plotline that runs throughout the game, and it covers the story of the war between the few factions. Kind of similar to the Garrison campaign or the Order Hall campaign, but they're only making 2 of them, one for each faction, so it should be a bit more content-rich, at least I would hope. This campaign will also involve establishing outposts on the other faction's continent, and then at 120, both continents will be open for world quests and other activities. Now, they did say that, for example, while the Alliance may not go to Nazmir for the same reason as the Horde, they will still have a good reason to go there. So it does seem like we will be getting more diverse narrative content, perhaps incentivizing you to play through the game on both sides. So, let's talk about this content, beginning with Kul'tiras. This is a very old human kingdom that was founded 2,500 years ago by a group of Gilnean explorers. Its harsh island conditions have not only led to them having a massive fleet, but also being a very hardy people. And the region is ruled by 4 families, and it's got some dark secrets below the surface. Now, our story on this island focuses on dealing with these various different mysteries and, of course, the various factions. And let's begin with the first zone, Tiragard Sound. So, this is the central zone of Kul'tiras, and it is the location of the nation's capital, Borealis. This is going to be the Alliance hub city for the expansion, certainly quite a step up over something like Stormshield. Now, this region is led by House Proudmoore, specifically it's led by Jaina's mother, Catherine, and what you'll find here is a bunch of pretty hardy, more stylized humans than we will have seen in the past. Not only do they have to fight big sea monsters, but they also have to deal with pirates, who, in that area, have set up the pirate city of Freehold. Visually, you can see that the city itself is maybe a little bit grey, but it is quite stylized, and you can see that the scenery around is definitely quite nice indeed. And it also seems to be really quite big as a city as well, which should be quite cool to see. Now, our next zone for Kul'tiras is Drustvar. This is led by House Waycrest, and they essentially supply Kul'tiras with arms. But here's the problem, the Waycrests have pretty much went off the grid. This is causing big problems for the war effort, and our attempts to get to the bottom of it will lead to us discovering that really not is all well with the land. And this seems like a very varied zone from a visual perspective. We've got dense forests, but we also have big rolling hills and a lovely diffuse light sort of blanketing all of it, and a lot of autumnal colors as well. And then, of course, things do get a bit spooky here and there. We've got some witches and spirits and some new monster types that almost remind me of something from, say, The Witcher. Then the final zone of Kul'tiras is Stormsong Valley. So House Stormsong rule the region, and they seem like an odd group, almost a bit like the Ironborn in the religious sense. So basically they are kind of led by sea priests, and their religion is pretty much centered around the ocean, and this is where the Kul'tiran navy is constructed, to the point where shipbuilding really is just a core part of these guys' culture. The area is currently in trouble. It's being invaded by dark forces, so we'll have to see what they are. And it might be my favorite of the Kul'tiran zones visually. There's a lot of wide open spaces and some really quite serene looking areas with a backdrop of snow-capped mountains. Definitely one that's very nice looking. With the Alliance covered, let's talk about the Horde. So, we are going to be going to the island of Zandalar, which of course is the home to the Zandalari Empire, which is one of the oldest in the world, over 16,000 years old. So Zandalar was cleft away from the main continent in the Sundering, and while much of the Empire did sink, the Zandalari were able to adapt, and they formed a massive navy. Then of course the Cataclysm happened, it did massive damage to the island, but it seems like they've stabilized. Once again, this region is split into 3 zones, so let's check out Zuldazar first. Now Zuldazar is the capital of the Zandalari, and really it's their last safe refuge. The continent is, as we'll soon find out, in a bit of a crisis. For Horde players, this is going to be your home city for this expansion, and interestingly, King Rastakhan and his daughter are key characters, so I'm definitely quite keen to see how Blizzard are able to tell the story of the Zandalari, turning from hostile forces into friendly ones. Of course, while we're here, we're going to be dealing with lots of quest content, there's a potential rebellion that we need to quash, and also blood troll incursions from the south. The next zone that we're going to talk about is Nazmir. So, before the Cataclysm, this was a forest, but the Cataclysm ruined that. The island began to sink, and this turned into a dense swamp, which as it turns out is pretty much the perfect place for blood trolls to gather and eventually start launching attacks on Zuldazar. While questing here, we'll be enlisting the help of the Loa as we explore deeper. We're also going to be finding a new Titan facility, one that could potentially house something that would be planet-ending in terms of how dangerous it is, if we're not careful. So I'm sure that'll be quite fun, and it seems like this is also the first raid. Now, it seems like they're really trying to use this to add in some new Titan lore, which makes a lot of sense given the recent content of the game, and I love the visual of the blood moon looming over the zone, and the new trolls and enemy types look quite cool as well. Once again, it's a zone that visually is quite varied looking, it's not just all one color of swamp, and as we progress through it, we're going to be seeing the influence of those blood trolls, and also we get undead dinosaurs, so yeah, can't argue against that. Let's move on to Valle Dune. So, this was once again a big, dense jungle until, thousands of years ago, the Akir launched a massive attack on the area. Nowadays, Zandalari exiles are sent to the desert to live out their days. Spoilers, they don't really last too long. And while we are here, we're going to be meeting the painfully cute Volpera and the significantly less cute and more hostile Sethrak, who are a group of enemy snake people. I'm quite glad that we're getting another desert zone. For me, Tanaris and Uldum are quite iconic, they're favourites of mine, but of course this is not all barren. We see various different looks on the desert theme in here, but also an oasis and the Sethrak Citadel, so it does seem to be quite a nice area. And that pretty much is it for the new continents. Now, it's important to note that similar to Legion, you are able to tackle these zones in any order, so if you want to do Valle Dune first, well, you're free to do that. Now, with all that covered, let's talk about characters. So the characters are going to be playing more of a role in the narrative this time. Blizzard liked how Illidan worked out in Legion, and they basically want to do more of that. This is something that I'm really happy about. While a cool plotline is great, the core of a good story almost always is the emotional arc of characters, so it's great that that's going to be a focus. This expansion is going to be focusing on Anduin and Sylvanas as they lead both of their sides in the war, and Jaina will also feature heavily. She's a very damaged character, as they explored later on in the Q&A. She didn't step in at Stratholme, that led to Arthas and the Lich King. Her actions also directly led to the death of her father, part of the founding of the modern Horde. There was her actions at Dalaran, which, got a little bit violent here and there. Overall, she's had a pretty rough time. And in the Q&A, they covered how Jaina's arc in this expansion will involve how she deals with all of this history and manages to move forward. Also, Thrall is going to be back. I think this is quite good. Thrall has had some time off, and hopefully they've realized that the whole Green Jesus direction is probably not the best way to take that character. And to cap this video off, I'm going to talk about what we know of the dungeon and raid content. They didn't give away too much, but we know this. This expansion is going to ship with 10 dungeons, and then each faction will have 4 of their own leveling dungeons, and then all dungeons will be opened up at max level. They're also going to be making various improvements to the Mythic Plus group finder to help you do that, and of course, yes, that means Mythic Plus is a feature, thankfully, that will be staying. Now, there were 2 dungeons that they focused on. They're a Freehold, a pirate city located in a cliffside, and a Tal Dazar, which is a Zandalari tomb. The other dungeons are Tuol Dagor, Waycrest Manor, Shrine of the Storm, Siege of Boralis, Temple of Sethralis, Undermoot, King's Rest, and Kazan. Yep, so we're going back to Kazan, and it's quite cool that Siege of Boralis is one because, well, that's the Alliance hub city in this expansion. Then they talked a little bit about the first raid. It's an 8-boss long instance called Uldir Halls of Control. It's basically a Titan facility. We'll be dealing with corruption there. I assume we'll be finding out a little bit more about the Titans, and assuming this is the same Titan facility that they talk about in Zandalar, it's going to have some very dangerous technology inside it. Both Alliance and Horde are going to have slightly different reasons for going in here, but the actual content is going to be the same. And then finally, they did tease that Ashara will be a part of a raid in this expansion, but we really do not know much more than that. So, there you go. That is pretty much a look at the areas you'll be visiting in this expansion, a lot of the things that you'll be doing. When you combine this video with the spotlights on the new features in this expansion, that should give you a pretty good idea of what Blizzard wants to deliver. So that's it for this video. I'm super keen to hear what you've got to say about this expansion's content, and if you want to check out a handy playlist that's got all my BlizzCon coverage, you can see that linked. So, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.